Hello, my name is Andy and I am the Village Idiot. I'm armed with a car and a GoPro and an unhealthy amount of time on my hands. I'm using that time to attempt to visit every civil parish in England. You're watching the York series. Sitting within North Yorkshire, York is a very historic place with 31 civil parishes within its city boundaries. Here's one of them for your enjoyment. Welcome back to the city of York, everybody. Now, this episode was meant to start at a lock on the River Ouse. You might just be able to see the River Ouse down there, down that little slipway. Now, down there used to be a ferry years and years ago. We're going to talk about that ferry as we journey around this place. Annoyingly, like I said, I couldn't start at the lock because it's a private road. Didn't know that till I got here. But that will form today's special section. Welcome to Nabburn. Here's my disclaimer for people who may be watching me for the first time. I say things as I would in my native accent and dialect. As a result, I may not pronounce things in the same way as the locals do. Remember, I'm a visitor. It's impossible to know everything. Leave me a comment, spin me a like and bash that subscribe button. Let's get to today's parish video. Welcome to Nabburn, or Nabburn, a delightful riverside settlement situated 4 miles to the south of York. It lies on the eastern side of the River Ouse and was historically part of the East Riding of Yorkshire. Since 1996, it's been part of the city of York. Nabburn was a predominantly agricultural community, with local farms prospering on the rich alluvial soil that surrounds the village. Until the mid-20th century, Nabburn was almost completely owned by one family, the Palms, who lived at Naburn Hall. Their history is well documented and they have links to both Somerset and to Belvoir Castle. A lot of modern-day Nabburn exists as it is thanks to the family, and in this episode we'll discuss why. Nabburn is classed as being within the floodplain of the River Ouse. Most of the parish is low-lying, and to the west of the village is an area of extensive ings. The Ouse forms its entire western parish boundary. On the northern boundary was Naburn Hospital, a psychiatric hospital formerly known as York City Asylum until it closed in 1988. Also to the north is a sewage works. Opened in 1895, it once had its very own narrow gauge railway. And speaking of railways, there's an old station here as well, sited along a very familiar trail. This is Nabburn then, and it's time for a walk, I think. Our first landmark is Naburn Hall, which is at the end of this road, Maypole Grove. Naburn Hall was the primary residence of the Palms family, who owned the majority of the village between 1226 and the early 20th century. A powerful family, they were originally seated at Taunton Dean in Somerset. The family can trace its ancestry all the way back to Robert de Todini, who was a powerful Norman baron. Todini's importance is reflected by the 80 estates in 11 counties that he was granted across England. His principal lordship was at Belvoir Castle, and it was he who established Belvoir Priory in 1076. Among Todini's many estates was Nabburn. In 1226, William Palms of Taunton acquired the lordship of Nabburn through marriage. And here we are at Naburn Hall. First recorded in 1345, this was rebuilt in 1735 and has since been enlarged. Attached to the hall is the family's private chapel, dedicated to St. Nicholas. Now, the hall overlooks the River Ouse. Historically, there used to be 2 ferries that cross the Ouse from here to the other side. Our next landmark is one of the ferry's locations. In 1739, a ferry was situated just to the west of Naburn Hall. In the early 19th century, it was in competition with the horse and foot road that led from the main village street past the hall and across Naburn Ings to a second ferry, said to have been started by the Thompsons of Escrick. Due to increased traffic, it proved a nuisance to the Palms family. In 1824, they closed the road and the ferry moved. This slipway here is where it was moved to. The ferry carried both passengers and vehicles, and it worked by wheel and chain. It closed in 1956, leaving Nabburn with no river crossing. The slipway is still used though, because this is the base of Yorkshire Ouse Sailing Club, founded in 1938. This building here is their clubhouse. The club has regular sailing activities on a Wednesday evening and at weekends. Sailing on the Ouse isn't easy, there's often challenging wind conditions on the water. And you can tell that used to be one of the locations of a ferry, because behind me is Ferry Farm House. Keeps the history of this area going. Now let's head up Front Street, which is to my left, your right as you look at it. There we go. Up here we've got a post office and a few other bits and bobs. So that's our next task. So this is Front Street, where you can catch a bus if you need one. Nabburn is served by the number 42, which connects York to Selby. This bus shelter has all manner of things. Part of it is a book exchange, and there's a parish notice board in here as well. Ticket off, York fans. This quaint little building is Naburn's former Victorian reading room. This has been used in recent years as a doctor's surgery and still doubles up as the village's post office. After that, Front Street continues north to where it eventually ends at the B1222. The rest of the street is residential. One thing that must frustrate some of the residents here is the fact that there's no crossing over the Ouse anymore. This means relatively long road journeys are needed to get around. Still, it's worth living here if you like charming, quirky features. Take, for example, this house, Clock Cottage, and that's the right time as well. Okay, so if you turn left at the end of Front Street, you're heading up in towards York, and you'll pass York Marina, which is this behind me. Now this is a much bigger site than what you can see on the camera right now. It stretches for quite a way up there. We'll see a bit more of this later, because I also need to talk about a former railway station, which is also in that direction. That's coming at the end of the video. After making our way over Howden Dike, which runs into the Ouse, we're now walking down the B1222 or York Road. This passes the village school, the green and the church, and is a 20-mile-an-hour limit right in the village centre. Again, it's mostly residential with some little cul-de-sacs leading off it. About halfway down the road you'll pass Palms Close. No prizes for guessing how that one got its name. It's good to see the village history preserved in this way. Not far past that we have Vicarage Lane. This building in shot now is the old vicarage. This is Naburn's most expensive property, worth just over £1 million. Vicarage Lane is otherwise a dead end, and there is one other very important landmark on it, the village hall, which is central to Nabburn life. This is used for a wide range of events, including a summer gala, quiz nights and a variety of groups and club meetings. It's also turned into a polling station on election days. And if you go around the back of the village hall, that's where you're going to find the playground, the play area, the recreational space. There's a football pitch there as well. So people of Nabburn are well served when it comes to things like this. Okay, our next job is to head towards the church. If I just turn the camera around slightly, you might be able to see the spire of the church in the distance over there. So let's head there via the school. There's been a school in the village since 1743. The original school was replaced by a national school, which is now Nabburn Church of England Primary School. Built between 1871 and 72 and then enlarged in 1889, this recently celebrated its 150th anniversary, something which is proudly displayed on this banner. The spire of St Matthew's Church then comes into view. A place of worship at Nabburn was first mentioned in records in 1353. Located to the south of the village, St Matthew's was rebuilt on its present site in 1854. It was designed in the decorated style by G.T. Andrews of York. As well as this, Nabburn used to have a place of worship for Wesleyan Methodists as well, but their chapel, located close to the village centre, closed in 1970. In the churchyard we have a very simple Latin cross, which is the village war memorial. There are 13 names on this one, 11 from World War I and 2 from World War II. Okay, so from here it's just a walk back to where we started. There are still a few other things to catch, including the phone box, there's a flagpole, there's a pub, there could be some other bits and bobs, who knows? Let's go and find out. The last part of the walk takes us back to the village centre via this very attractive village green, which has a flagpole. Located just next to the school, this is where Main Street meets the B1222. Straight ahead of us here is the River Ouse and the slipway alongside the sailing club. Also in this area there's an old red phone box, which is both an information kiosk and the location of the village's defib machine. To finish with, we need to talk about the village pub, and even though this building here isn't it, it is related to it. That is the old blacksmith's shop. If you go back to the mid-1700s, there were 3 alehouses in Nabburn, but by 1822 only one remained, and it was called the Horseshoe. Here is the pub in question. The landlord of the Horseshoe was also the village blacksmith. In 1872, this was renamed to the Blacksmith's Arms. This episode was supposed to start at Naburn Locks, which lie around a mile to the south of the village on the River Ouse, located at the end of a private road. In 1741, a weir was made at Naburn and a lock was opened in 1757. As a result, this created an island on which a watermill was later built. A second, larger lock was constructed beside the old one in 1888. These locks form the barrier between the tidal and non-tidal parts of the river. Part of the River Ouse navigation, Naburn locks were once busy with barges transporting goods to and from York. The first lock was one of the earliest examples of canal engineering in the country. The second one, though, was arguably the more important because it was built to allow large freight barges to pass through. It was opened by Prince Albert Victor, the grandson of Queen Victoria. Today, the locks are sited next to Naburn Lock Caravan Park. Not a bad place for a little getaway. Close to York Marina, which opened in 1970 by the way, is the route of the former York to Selby railway line, which crossed the River Ouse just to the north of the village. It did so by way of a swing bridge built in 1871. Naburn also had a station on the line, and this building was it. It was closed to passengers in 1953 and goods in 1964. The line closed in 1983 when the Selby diversion was opened. This, of course, is the same line which we talked about in the Recall episode of Selby. Here, it's now part of the channel's favourite trail. Yes, the Trans-Pennine Trail is back, folks. It's been ages since we've seen it. It provides a handy route for both pedestrians and cyclists heading into York. Now, do you remember the Cycle the Solar System trail also featured in the Recall episode? Well, here in Naburn, you pass Saturn. The closer you get to York, the closer you get to the sun. In Bishopthorpe, just over the bridge, we'll be seeing Mars. Now, if you clicked on this video thinking that you could see something about Naburn Hospital in this episode, well, I'm going to have to disappoint you, because most of Naburn Hospital was actually over the border into Fulford, so you'll have to wait for the Fulford episode for that. Part of it is in Naburn. If you just have a look here, you can see in the very far distance there's a house. That's Acre's house. I believe that's Acre's house from this distance. It's hard to tell. That's in Naburn, but it's right on the border. Everything else that was to do with the hospital is actually over the border and into Fulford. So like I said, you have to wait for that episode. And that's just about it. There's nothing much more to cover here in Naburn now. I think I've pretty much covered everything of interest. So there you go. That's been the parish of Naburn, and I've been Andy, also known as the Village Idiot, and I'm out.